Yu-Gi-Oh's power creep is the stuff of legends. You've got old school vanilla monsters with terrible stats that even require tributes versus new monsters that generate insane card advantage and combos and can win you the game in one turn. A good chunk of the game's earliest cards are utterly unplayable by today's standards. However, even Yu-Gi-Oh's very first set had a few worthwhile cards in it that stood out above the rest, a handful of which even continue to see play to this day. In this video, I'll be counting down the top 10 cards from the TCG's first expansion, The Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon. Beginning the list at number 10 is a normal spell card, Swords of Revealing Light. This card's effect reads, after this card's activation, it remains on the field, but you must destroy it during the end phase of your opponent's third turn. When this card is activated, if your opponent controls a face-down monster, flip all monsters they control face-up. While this card is face-up on the field, your opponent's monsters cannot declare an attack. This card was one of Yugi's staples during the Duel Monsters anime run, especially during Duelist Kingdom. Back then, the game moved a lot slower, so preventing your opponent from attacking for 3 turns bought you enough time to figure out how to turn the tide in your favor. In the real-life card game, Swords was one of the first and best stall cards. In a meta that often required normal summoning and tributing monsters in order to win by sheer brute force battle damage, 3 turns was enough to keep you alive and usually let you summon at least one strong monster before its protection wore off. Crucially, unlike later stall cards like Nightmare's Steel Cage, Swords of Revealing Light's effect was asymmetrical. You were free to attack at any point during those 3 turns, while your opponent had to sit there and wait for the last sword to dissipate. Ultimately, the advent of more spot removal, negation effects, and an overall speed boost to the game's tempo rendered this card pretty meaningless, but it was the best at what it did for a good while. Next up is another card that was shockingly powerful for its time period but probably wouldn't see play anywhere today. It's Man-Eater Bug in the number 9 spot. This is a level 2 earth insect with 450 attack and 600 defense. Its stats are pitiful, but its true power lies in its short effect. Flip. Target one monster on the field, destroy it. Ah yes, flip effect monsters. Outside of dedicated archetypes and strategies, flip effects don't really see play anymore as they're just far too slow for the modern meta. Back in the day though, Man-Eater Bug was a very real threat. It was cheap in that it didn't require any tributes, and it also offered some versatility. If it left the field, it could take out whatever monster attacked it. Or if your opponent was unsure about attacking your face-down monster, you could flip Man-Eater Bug on a later turn, pop an enemy monster, and still use it as fodder for a tribute summon. The mere existence of this card made attacking into face-downs risky, especially if you were swinging with a monster that you invested tributes to bring out in the first place. Man-Eater Bug was later power crept out of relevance, but it was one of the game's earliest monster-based forms of removal and was once a powerful card in its historical context. At number 8, I have another classic card from Yugi's arsenal, Dark Magician. This is a level 7 Dark Spellcaster with 2500 attack, 2100 defense, and that's it. Where these days you'd normally find several lines of effects, there's only this singular line of flavor text, the ultimate wizard in terms of attack and defense. This monster's biggest claim to fame is of course being the ace monster of the franchise's first protagonist, later spawning variants in categories such as effect, ritual, old, and girl. Dark Magician occupies a unique place in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh's meta as, due to its level and stats, it wasn't even the best old-school normal monster with 2500 attack. That honor went to a different monster of Yugi's, Summoned Skull, which could hit the field with only 1 tribute as opposed to the 2 that Dark Magician required. Still, Dark Magician received a lot of retrains and supports over the years that bolstered his competitive viability. Some of these support cards turned out to be quite good, and they themselves do continue to see play. Dark Magician himself has risen and fallen over the years, but recent consensus is that a Dark Magician-focused deck can only be a rogue strategy at best. I guess the age of the vanilla beatstick is long gone. Now wizards need more than just attack and defense. Number 7 on today's list is another dark-themed card, but it's not a monster's attribute this time, it's Dark Hole. Dark Hole is a spell card that simply reads, destroy all monsters on the field. There's a running joke in the Yu-Gi-Oh community that the shorter a card's effect is, the more powerful it is. While it's obviously not necessarily true all the time, this unofficial rule holds more true with older cards like this one. Dark Hole has no activation requirements, it has no cost, and it doesn't give either player any inherent benefit or drawback to being activated. It's just a swirling vortex that sucks up every monster in play. Despite affecting the monsters of the duelist activating this card just as much as their opponents, Dark Hole was an instant hit for its ability to level the playing field and potentially foster a comeback from a lopsided board state. There are obviously ways to break Dark Hole symmetry as well, the simplest one being activating it when you don't control any monsters, but but your opponent does. Dark Hole is an excellent card for clearing out enemy monsters that can't be targeted as well, since Dark Hole is non-targeting removal. On top of this, there are monsters and even archetypes that can take good advantage of being destroyed, so a symmetrical effect intended to punish you and your opponent equally can become all upside in your favor. As beneficial as Dark Hole's effect can be with the right setup, it ultimately was power crept out of the game in favor of even more powerful and less symmetrical cards, one of which we'll touch on later in the video. Before we do that though, let's talk about number 6, Polymerization. Yeah, we couldn't count down the top 10 cards from LOB without shining a spotlight on this iconic spell. This card reads, Fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field. For a time, this card was the only way to perform a fusion summon in Yu-Gi-Oh!, so it makes sense that it cemented its relevance from day one. It's not often that one card becomes synonymous with an entire summoning mechanic. Even fusion summoning's contemporary, ritual summoning, had a unique ritual spell for each ritual monster in the game. Imagine needing a card like Synchronization just to perform any synchro summon. As the years went by, Polymerization received a number of retrains and upgrades, such as the popular Super Polymerization that could utilize monsters from both sides of the field. Polymerization was one of the game's very first staples, a card that many decks of many different kinds ran, and it's no wonder the card still sees quite a bit of play to this day. Believe it or not, so does the next card on today's list, number 5, Blue Eyes White Dragon. That's right, the namesake of the expansion itself is only number 5 on its own list. That just goes to show you how powerful some of these cards were and still are. Between you and me, I was a bit surprised to learn how competitive Blue Eyes remains to this day. At a glance, it seems like nothing too special, a 3000 attack, 2500 defense normal monster that requires 2 tributes to be summoned. But, like with Dark Magician, Blue Eyes would be nothing without its many support cards received over the years. Kaiba's pet dragon is arguably even more iconic than Dark Magician when it comes to being the poster child of Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole. It was always stronger than Dark Magician in a vacuum, which is why it made such a good rival ace monster to create tension for Yugi and his signature spellcaster. Blue Eyes White Dragon remains the normal monster with the highest attack points to this very day, and that's unlikely to change in the future. Blue Eyes continuing to see play in the 2020s is due to its repeated waves of support over the years, and it so happens that Blue Eyes support ends up being more competitive than that released for Dark Magician. Or at the very least, it's more supportive of decks running Blue Eyes than Dark Magician support is of running Dark Magician. Barring some wild new Dark Magician support in the near future, it's likely he'll always live in the dragon's shadow, but there'd be no interesting rivalry without that fact, would there? It's still mind-boggling to me that Kaiba never won a duel fair and square against Yugi with this powerhouse on his side. You know what else is mind-boggling? Only 1.2% of my viewers are subscribed to the channel. If you're still watching, take a quick second to like and subscribe, and maybe leave your favorite card from today's video down in the comments. Now let's move on to an even more iconic, more polarizing, more powerful card that actually belonged to Yugi for a short while. Can you guess which card this is? Hint, he only got to use it in one duel. That's right, number 4 is Exodia the Forbidden One. Not everyone knows trivia about Blue Eyes White Dragon, but even players of other card games like Magic the Gathering and Pokemon have probably heard the phrase Exodia Obliterate, know what happens when you draw all 5 cards, or at the very least have seen this meme. Exodia the Forbidden One is a level 3 dark spellcaster with 1000 attack and defense, debatably the monster with the least important stat line in the entire game. That's because Exodia's effect allows you to win the duel if you assemble all 5 of his pieces in your hand, his head plus his 2 arms and legs. The first instant win card in the game and the very best to this day, Exodia quickly made an impact on the game's earliest metas and even warped the future of the game around his mighty presence. You see, the existence of a card that could win you the game without ever being summoned or activated made the power of draw spells that much more coveted. Other games like Magic give you draw power in exchange for mana like any other effect, and Pokemon lets you draw cards like candy, sometimes to your own detriment of decking out if you're not careful. Not so in Yu-Gi-Oh! In addition to setting an eternal limit on the power of card draw going forward, Exodia himself was later limited to 1 copy per deck to avoid making his victory condition too accessible. In fact, it's been said by some players that Exodia serves as a reliable bellwether for the health of the meta. If Exodia ever becomes a consistently viable strategy, it means other cards need to be banned or limited. Ironically, Exodia the Forbidden One isn't forbidden, but he can cause other cards to be. I was surprised to learn that Exodia has also seen more recent competitive play than I expected. According to my research, it actually topped some events last year and even finished in a top 4 this year. However, the fact that Exodia's victories are comparatively few and far between compared to other strategies suggests this is not an easily repeatable feat. Whether it's truly meta or just a rogue deck that pops in and out of competition throughout the years, Exodia remains limited to this day, proof that it still can't go unchecked even after decades of power creep. The remainder of the cards in this video follow that same trend, such as number 3, Raigeki. Raigeki is a normal spell card that reads, destroy all monsters your opponent controls. Remember earlier when I said Dark Hole had even better counterparts that were asymmetrical? Yeah, this is one such card. While Dark Hole can be good situationally, Raigeki is strictly better in a vacuum. In the early days, this was a great way to clear out your opponent's board and swing for lethal damage. Nowadays, of course, there are many more floating effects in Yu-Gi-Oh!, allowing your opponent to recoup value off their monsters being destroyed. But that hasn't stopped Raigeki from continuing to see extensive competitive play as recently as this year. Floaters aside, monsters and their effects in general have come to dominate the Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta, so destroying all of your opponent's most important on-field resources is still a punishing blow. This is perhaps even more true today than when Raigeki first appeared, as modern extra deck monsters typically require many more materials and moves to hit the field. The one-sided field destruction direct attack OTK is also more accessible now than it ever has been. Raigeki is so good that it was on and off the ban list for years. Given its recent competitive showings, it appears it's also here to stay in the meta in at least some capacity for the foreseeable future. It may have something to do with the fact that it's a spell card, and generic spell cards are inherently splashable in all sorts of decks. For another example, see the penultimate card of the list, number 2, Monster Reborn. This is one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most iconic spells. Its effect reads, target one monster in either graveyard, special summon it. Singing this card's praises might feel a little redundant to players who understand its utility. Monster Reborn lets you recover your best monster from your own graveyard, and it even lets you take your opponent's best monster from theirs. This can restart your own combos and engines, ruin your opponent's graveyard synergy, recycle beneficial effects, bring back a powerful monster to attack for game, the list goes on and on. Even more generically useful than a card like Polymerization, Monster Reborn spent some time on the ban list for being just too good and too ubiquitous, after which there was an advent of archetype-specific retrains that were weaker and inherently more niche. There was even Monster Reborn Reborn, which sought to replicate the spirit of the card by pulling 3 monsters from your grave and letting your opponent pick one. But even in the most optimal of scenarios, giving your opponent a choice is not usually a move worth making. However, Monster Reborn has since been unbanned, but remains limited to 1 copy due to its enviably simple and beneficial effect. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the very best card from the Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon, a card that will likely never find its way off the ban list, and that card is, number 1, Pot of Greed. Yeah, you saw this one coming from a mile away if you remembered that it came from this expansion. Pot of Greed is a normal spell card with a bit of a convoluted effect. Based on a frame-by-frame review of duels in the original anime where it was played, plus a list of historical rulings by Yu-Gi-Oh! Judges, this is my understanding of what it does. Basically, Pot of Greed is a spell card that allows you to pick up the top 2 cards of your deck, look at them, and immediately add them to your hand with no additional costs or drawbacks. Yeah, memes aside, generic draw power in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is highly coveted. This is true due to the existence of Exodia, but it's only become more true as the game has aged and the meta's speed has increased. Since cards are your only resource in Yu-Gi-Oh!, trading one of them for 2 is a +1 in card advantage, and this is very valuable. Pot of Greed had many retrains that, unlike some other cards with underpowered retrains, were still heavily played due to the major impact of this kind of effect. These included draw 2 spells that came with additional heavy costs or deck building restrictions, as well as other pot cards that let you draw cards in exchange for significant downsides. Pot of Greed would be an instant auto-include in almost any deck regardless of the meta, and that's been true since it was first banned in 2005. That's because everyone was playing it even after it got limited, and that made it just too powerful for a healthy metagame. Like I said, this card will probably never be unbanned, making it the absolute best card from the Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon. There you have my picks for the top 10 cards from Yu-Gi-Oh's first expansion. Do you disagree with these cards or the order I put them in? What's your favorite card from LOB? Tell me these and any other thoughts you might have down in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe for future videos like this one, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next Yu-Gi-Oh! Top 10. If you've made it to this outro, I appreciate you being here, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.